So Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, what are we talking about today?
Man, we're talking about individuation.
Individuation, what the heck is that?
It's really a concept by Carl Jung, and I'll define it. It's
You know
the
how I
process.
love definitions.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank
You
you.
do. The process of becoming a unique whole individual. It involves integrated variations. Integrated various parts of the psyche, including the conscious and unconscious aspects, to achieve self-realization.
Self-realization. Now, why in the world would we be talking about individuation?
Well, I think we're talking about individuation because in our last episode, we talked about self, the concept of self. And so I think this is a continuation. And, offline, we got together and thought it would be good to kind of just do a quick series on the concept of self. So we defined it based on, our own observations and some accepted definitions last week or in our last episode. And now we're really looking at some of the mechanisms of deploying self.
Yes.
And individuation is, I think, a really good starting point.
Let's get into the how.
Yes.
Right? That's. I think we have this podcast that's about the never-ending process of expansion and growth, right? But it's important that we kind of have some dialogue around what does that look like? What's the day-to-day? And to me, individuation has become a huge part of that process. I think, and for me personally, I'd love to hear your take on this as well, but it didn't necessarily start there. It started with just understanding, just really taking stock, inventory, paying attention, noticing what are my attributes and how do they present and interact in this crazy world that we live in. And how can I leverage those, right, to have a more meaningful existence? And what is a more meaningful existence? What is that? I think that's up to each of us to define, really. But to me, has a lot to do with peace and connected relationships and meaningful contribution. And then, there's a health component tied in there some way as well. But I'm curious to hear in your journey of self-discovery and expansion and growth, how has individuation played a role? And when did it kind of arrive on the scene, and what did it look like for you? If you're comfortable sharing. No pressure.
Yeah, so I think for me, individuation, when I look at the definition very broadly, the word that comes to mind is integration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, what are we integrating?
The individual?
The individual, sure, but we're also integrating the various parts of the psyche. And so, that happens in stages. And one of the stages that I remember fondly, which will be weird for a lot of people to hear, but is something called the assimilation of the shadow. Right? So you've ever heard of that concept?
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, this is like the heart of individuation, like the
Right.
cardinal feature of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's something that's not encouraged enough in our environment because we look at things in a positive light. There's always for the most part, a positive ending on all of our stories.
Right.
Or there's an illuminated ending, right? It's very
There's a
light
polarity.
oriented. Yeah.
Right.
In terms
There's
of
light and darkness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we rarely look at the other side of the spectrum or the other pole on the spectrum, and that is the darker, often hidden aspects. And so with reference to individuation and the assimilation of the shadow, it's the darker hidden aspects of oneself,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what I kind of remember, whenever I started to actually live out this concept of individuation, I started to really look at the darker aspects of myself and really started to look at some of the behaviors and actions and characteristics that were manifest,
Right.
and tried to understand where they came from, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And then like I look at certain things and I'm like, oh, I hurt that person. Oh, or I was made aware that I did something that wasn't necessarily on the light side of the spectrum. And I had to try to understand where that came from. And so that's whenever, like I said, I started to actually look at the shadowy parts of myself and what they represent. And then I had to reject or deny what I saw. But once I was made aware of the actions, then I had to look at the actual origins.
Yeah.
Then I had to accept or deny what was there.
What's the process? You surprised me when you say like reject or deny, in the context of accept or reject or deny. And I'm curious, like how does that work? I've never, I think for myself it's really it's a challenge to look at the negative aspects. There's a fear response that gets triggered anytime we look at something that is on the dark side of the equation, as opposed if we're categorizing them as good and bad, right? Then the bad we're gonna have an adverse response to. And so, yeah, I'm curious.
You just said it.
Yeah.
I think when we apply morality to the spectrum of dark and light, I think that's whenever we start to get that there's a reluctance to actually look at ourselves, right, in a comprehensive way.
Yeah.
That's where the rejection comes in to play, because now we're deeming ourselves as bad.
Right.
When that's not really what it is. Maybe the action had a bad outcome when it was framed with morality, because that's the way I see morality, right? Bad, good, right?
Right.
Evil, good, right? But I think if we just simply look at self as adaptive and maladaptive, positive, negative, these terms that don't carry the moral weight, then I think at that point it's easy to understand how the positive and dark, the negative and positive, and the dark and light, how those things are working together, in tandem,
Right.
more often than we know.
This is interesting. I'm glad that you brought up the subject of morality, because I think we really can't have this conversation around individuation without referencing morality, right? And it kind of begs the question, what is morality, and is it relevant to this conversation? Because I could also see the counter argument there, which is like going back to Shakespeare's "nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so,"
Right.
which I subscribe to that in large part.
I subscribe to another guy.
Yeah.
Socrates, no one does wrong willingly. Same thing, right?
Can you explain that idea for those of us who might not be as familiar with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, no one does wrong willingly, just basically, he's looking at how we perceive our decisions as right and just, or explainable to us.
Right.
Right. So if I do something wrong, I was doing it for a reason, and therefore it was the right thing to do. It was the right choice that I made. It may not have been right for everyone else.
Right.
Yeah. So to go back to your point.
I'm so sorry. Were you going to finish?
No, go. I was done.
The confusion there for me was, is this we're all doing the best we can with the resources we have perspective, or it sounds more like maybe what Socrates was hinting at is we can always rationalize anything. There's always a frame of reference from which that action seems more acceptable. Right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we're practicing empathy, then we can understand that people are, for the most part, trying to do the best with what they have.
Yeah.
If we are trying to find understanding, then we can at some point get to the origin of that thought process, right? If we're thinking rationally about others' behaviors,
Yeah.
then it's much more likely that we're going to be like, I actually see and understand how they got there, right?
I love that. I love that because one of the things that we teach in the culture work line of things is that, there really is no... hold on, let me set the stage. So when it comes to morality, that is our inherent sense of right and wrong. Okay. However, the development of morality, it occurs differently than, say, like technology, for instance. Technology has been developing over a really long period of time, and we've had exponential or explosive technological developments. We have not seen the same relationship with morality. Morality has grown, in my opinion, more slowly, and I think that it becomes apparent when we look at like the challenges that we face in today's, like in our global village at this point in time, is we have really reached some major milestones when it comes to technology. Since the 1970s, we've had the technology needed to feed every mouth on the planet. But we haven't harnessed that technology for that outcome. And I think it's in large part due to the fact that these on a graph, morality and technology are not progressing at the same rate. And I think that, to reference like our last episode that we recorded, was we have a populace that is highly distracted by entertainment, right? This could be listening to this podcast, or it could be some pursuit, any pursuit, right? That it could be of materialism, it could be of fame, or whatever the case is.
Doing a podcast,
right? Doing the podcast, any project really can distract us from the moral development, which could be framed as a perspective of greater psychological maturity. And I just say psychological maturity in reference to perspective. At the end of the day, the things that separate you and I are, they're nothing. They're really, in the grand scheme of things, just relatively nothing. Whereas what we share in common is it's vast, yet we fixate on the differences. And I think like the degree to which I believe that you are different from me and you're separate from me leads me to prioritize my own interests without any regard for the outcome that that'll fall to you eventually. Am I making any sense here? I know
you
I've
are
had
making
a really
a lot
sporadic.
of sense. You're making a lot of sense. I would say, I definitely see your perspective. My perspective and observation on morality is slightly different. I view morality as one of the first technologies.
Okay.
I do. I don't think we were born with a sense of morality. I think we came to be with a sense of adaptive and maladaptive receptors, things that are harmful, things that aren't harmful. But I think along the process of our evolution, good and bad came into play when we could survive long enough to really contemplate.
Right.
And then also deploy that technology. But I will say it has grown exponentially. It has grown, the technology of morality has grown almost as fast as any technology that we've ever had. We're right down the street from a huge mega church called First Baptist Dallas. that.
Are we conflating churches with morality?
No, what I'm saying is, when you look at the very premise, good and evil,
Mm-hmm.
right? The very premise of it is moral. And I think we're looking at the maturation, looking at the fruition of that very benign at that point. Whenever it was, when it came to inception, technology, right? So, I think the moment somebody decided that something was good or evil, and it was accepted, then it started to grow and evolve. And I think then that's when we have different traditions and customs and that highlight morality, which is fine. I'm just saying the reason I introduced it into this concept of individuation is that sometimes it can be hard to really accept the darker parts of self when we view it through a moral lens.
Okay. Well, so I hate to get stuck on morality here, but
Okay,
I think
we're thinking now.
so. There are these superstructures in the world. We would call them laws or cultural norms, right? About right and wrong and good and bad and what's acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. But I suspect that there are early stage determinants of what we perceive to be good and bad based in our childhood, based on our own direct experience. And I'm referring really to the experience of, let's just call it fear on one hand, which is really like rooted in insecurity, instability, and a lack of comfort. And then we also have, on the other end of that continuum, we have love and we have connectedness and meaning and purpose. So I think as children, we understand what it feels like to be in fear. We understand what it feels like to be connected or to be disconnected. And we know that children begin developing, perspective, a more holistic perspective in their 7, 8, 9 years old, right? They're beginning to understand that my experience and your experience, they're different. And we feel differently about them because our experiences are different to begin with, and then we also have different triggers, right? And different values, which cause us to interpret, even if it was the same experience, which is not. Differently. So, and I think from that perspective, if I am feeling fear as a result of your actions, I can then safeguard you from feeling that fear because I have compassion for you, right? So from that perspective, I think that morality is somewhat innate. It's native to us, as social creatures.
Let me correct and clarify. So correct myself. I think I might have been talking, a much longer timeline than just like our current society.
Right.
I think it's in, like I said, it's come to fruition. Like whatever the impetus for morality was at some point, and I'm talking a long time ago, right? I think now, or at least in our most recent history, I agree. Someone could come to awareness at a certain age in an environment and be informed of what is good and what is bad, or what morality is for that particular environment.
Not just because of the rules, but also through their experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, because they're getting feedback on like, oh no, don't do that. Or,
right.
Oh. Yeah, and I've seen this. I've seen children and I actually talk about this in my book, how we live in a building, it's more aspirational class, I think, but it's also, different types of people, right? And so I will see children like get in. I mean, I'm talking little kids get into the elevator, and they'll just be staring at me, right? Because I don't know, they've never seen someone like me, or I don't know, but they're staring at me, and their parents will correct them, and as if they're wrong, right? When really their child is just curious.
Mm-hmm.
And what if their child was simply seeing another part of themselves,
Right.
but that parent has now created separation using the technology or tool of morality? No, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
You're not.
Right.
The
They
kid
were
is just
afraid
being
of the way that you might react
right.
to it.
They were
yeah.
afraid of the way that I might react, and they were trying to spare me
Yeah.
or their child. Either way, what did it ultimately do?
Yeah, I mean, the event was at the child's expense.
Yes.
Now they've learned that to be curious is bad.
Yes. And we've applied a moral lens to it because the parent didn't want to seem whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Perfect segue for us to get out of morality before we put everybody to sleep. But I think that I'm so glad that we discussed it because, individuation relies on the concept of shadow work, which is essentially, the parts of myself that I perceive as negative. I'm going to notice them. I'm going to interact with them, and with the highest goal being that I accept them, right? But I think it can be challenging to do that when we are looking at parts of ourselves and saying these are good, and parts of ourselves and saying that these are bad. So what happens if we give ourselves permission in this circumstance to say no part of me is good or bad? It simply is.
Yes.
And which leads me into one of my favorite quotes. That I think this is by Robert Bly, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it says something to the effect of, the unloved parts of ourselves cannot help but become resentful to us in time. Which I think it's a fundamental truth applied internally, right? If you choose not to include somebody for a long enough period of time, if it's, expressed to them that they're not accepted and they're not worthy, even if you started out with a relationship of acceptance and connection, that will eventually fall apart because, there's some reciprocity there. So I don't know. What do you think about this idea that we could look at ourselves and try not to classify and categorize things with morality, with good and bad, but rather just as an objective observer?
Yeah, I love it. I am. Right. And I think if we looked at ourselves that way, we could also look at other things that way, like events. It happened, period. Right? Not it happened and it means this, it means that. No, it happened.
You know what I've been thinking about a lot lately? So, first thing I do when I get home from work, see my beautiful wife, give her a kiss, say, "How was your day?" Harmless, right? Seems empathetic. Like, I care because I do.
Yeah, I think.
However, I'm like, as soon as I get home, I'm inviting her to step into a space of judgment. And I just started noticing it, and I don't have the solution. Maybe you have the solution. You're going to share it with me today. But, it's just one of those things where I think we do these things without noticing what tools are in our employ. What do we have equipped? And how are we using it? It's fascinating.
It is. It's fascinating. And I think when we look at ourselves that way, without classifying it through whatever lens. And we're sitting with ourselves, sitting with our actions, sitting with our feelings. I think at that point you're set up for, integration. But I don't think you can get there until you first start to assimilate the shadow. Like we're talking about. Yeah.
Are you Have you heard of IR theory, identity role theory?
I think I have.
I feel like this is something that you would be familiar with. And just for our listeners, and anybody who's not familiar with the concept, it's essentially the situation gets dicey when we conflate or confuse our identity with the roles that we play in life, right? So for me, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a father to a dog, I'm a friend,
And
I'm
a
an
cat.
entrepreneur, yes, and a cat, our beautiful Forrest.
Don't forget about Forrest.
Oh my gosh,
See that?
never.
I made sure he did
Yeah.
forget about the Forrest.
But anyways, those are my roles. And so, right, in this instance, I forgot to mention the cat. And so I might be like, I'm a bad cat dad.
There we
now,
go. Yeah.
And if my identity is tied up in the role that I have as cat daddy, then suddenly my self-worth is waning.
Yes.
And that leads to all kinds of different outcomes when we don't feel like we have our self-worth, when we don't feel secure in that. Ties into contingent self-worth, where now we're going out and trying to achieve our worthiness. If I can just get this accomplishment or hit this milestone, then I'll be worthy again. Mm-hmm. And so you want to talk about a driving force to get people to work and work and work. That is one. Unfortunately, the pot of gold, the proverbial pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, is fool's gold. There's been a fair bit of research around this. We cannot earn our worth. The goalpost will always move, and there is always somebody who has achieved more or done something, at a higher level. So that's the basic concept: is that we can take our identity and root it in something that is immovable or sustainable. And I think that the reason that I bring it up is because it sounds like what we're touching on right now is identifying as the observer. You probably, we've talked about this.
Now we're in my world.
Right. And this is
Identifying
something
as the
that
observer.
you so excel at. So, but I think I suspect that identifying as the observer could really help us when it comes to this process of individuation, the shadow work, accepting the more unsightly aspects of ourselves. What can you share with us about being the observer, the benefits of that?
The benefits of being the observer.
Yeah.
One of them is that it's a peaceful place. In astrology, there is a concept of it's called the perch. So it's in my chart. My wife, she, gave me a reading one time, and she said that, one of the things that are that's in my chart is that I have characteristics of like some sort of animal that is up on a perch, typically like a bird, right, or eagle vision or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm most comfortable. It's just like kind of looking at things,
Right.
From an observer's perspective, and living and finding perspective is like, my thing. I love it.
Yeah. You're good at it.
I'm good at it. I'm comfortable there.
Yeah.
What I'm not so comfortable with, or haven't been for a while, is really the interfacing. You got to get on the ground and do that. Have you ever seen an eagle walk?
No. Is it awkward?
It's awkward, but it's probably sort of painful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think from an observer's perspective, you kind of get to soar, above things. You get to really see the entire picture. But, when you get down on the ground and whenever you're actually in it with people, it can be very, very painful. And, the downside there is that, it's also, when you're on that perch or whenever you're observing, it's isolating.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that feels comfortable after a while.
it's like, as you're saying this, my mind immediately jumps to Teddy Roosevelt's quote about being in the arena. I could see this as just the antithesis, right? And just for fun, because I think it's so good, and I'd love to have it on one of our podcasts. I'm going to read the quote.
That's Go ahead.
It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Very romantic, very inspirational, and I resonate with it. I also resonate with the observer. And I think that the magic, which, it seems to be a theme, right, across so many principles and so many disciplines, is that when we find balance between those two, we get the best result. And so I'd love to chat about that with you, because I think that we've both been intentional about trying to cultivate that. Just drawing on principles from experiential learning, and like how we experiential learning may on the surface seem as though you're learning from your experience. But we know, and this is famously quoted by John Dewey, that we don't learn from experience itself. We're learning from the reflection upon that experience. So if you spend all of your time in the arena, daring greatly, and if and when we fail to reflect on our experiences, we do not gain the full effect. And I'm not trying to paint it as binary and say that if you're always experiencing that you're never learning and growing, because I think reflection doesn't have to look like a podcast. It doesn't have to look like a meditation or, calendar blocking. It can happen instantaneously, but it is not guaranteed to happen instantaneously. And I think it does require, to get the maximum benefit, right, requires some intentionality. You reflect on this with me and share your own thoughts.
Yeah, no, I get it. Ultimately we want to find harmony between the two. I do think reflection happens upon, first you have to have the experience in a lot of ways. Very few people or collective groups of people can engage in the metaphorical comparison and look at the experience of others and truly gain the insight and get as close as they got to learning what they needed to learn from the experience, and then actually make the changes or apply the insight in their own lives. And I do think being an observer, that is the reason I'm comfortable with that is because I grew up in a very large family, and have a decent amount of siblings that are a lot older than I am, and so I was able to kind of learn from them. But I think looking back on it, looking at the shadow self, trying to get to the ultimate goal of individuation, achieving that higher level of consciousness and self-awareness, there has to be a fair amount of acceptance, right? And you do have to go through your own experiences, and you do have to accept the positive and negative elements of those experiences.
Yeah.
And I think most of us have gone through enough to at least start to do some of the shadow work.
Yeah.
And find the inner self. I just think a lot of us are distracted, pleasantly distracted from the pain. We're avoiding pain in a lot of ways. The pain of the awareness of self being separated from everything that there is, when really we're not separated at all. And that's the beauty of going, down this path and this journey and integrating with self is that that's what you learn. There's a connectivity. There's an intersectionality with every being, and there is really no unconsciousness. There's only consciousness and separation from that.
I think that was beautifully said.
Yeah.
So to build on this, I love how we're starting with the experience, right? And then we have intentional reflection on the experience. And in my mind, a critical next step in this process is the relation component. So, we've considered how the experience made us feel internally. We've taken a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying lens to our inner world, our inner experience. And we're beginning to establish some cause and effect type of relationship there, which is probably more of a correlation, not so much implying causation, but at least in our minds, that's how we put it together, right? That X made me feel Y. And then if we can relate that out to our friends and family, and try to understand how these situations may make them feel, understanding that we are at a major disadvantage because we don't have the scope of their experience. Their experience has been different from ours every single instant that we've been alive.
Right.
However, I think back to the Teddy Roosevelt quote, daring greatly to try and understand that. The more we do it, I feel like it's very much so a flywheel type of situation. It's very, very heavy at first, and it's very hard to turn. But the more exploration that we do in that area, the more that we ask thoughtful questions, seeking to truly understand, the more ground we are able to cover, the better our understanding is of the landscape there. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I think this is really where the magic begins to happen, where we start to, instead of focusing on the separateness, we begin to focus on the connectedness. And when I have this fundamental understanding that my actions, everything that I do, things that I choose not to do as well, the thoughts that I have, the comments that I make, the way I look at people, a simple glance or a smile, all of these things have a cascading effect that go on to create their own effects. And from that perspective, then we really start to get into the greater awareness, right? The first objective is to understand and accept ourselves. But why? Why does that matter? Well, there are a million different answers to that question. It's a choose your own adventure type of situation. However, I think that it enables us to identify with other people in a really compelling way. And people can feel that, and I just looking back over the course of our friendship, I'm so grateful that we've been able to relate and share ideas, share experiences, and maintain that openness, kind of holding space for one another to just show up and be genuine with I don't have fear that you are going to judge me.
No.
And it's like,
I agree. Well, I guess let me just go back to the question you asked. Why do we, go through that process of looking at self and deploying some of those mechanisms? And, why is it beneficial? Right.
Yeah.
I think that for me, I'm going to shift that a little bit and just turn that into how, how is it beneficial? Right. Because I think that's really what you answered is how it can be beneficial. And I think, there's a tapestry that it allows us to see. We get to understand our place. We get to understand our impact. with our self
Yeah.
and our connectivity, right? And so, when I think about my actions, the one thing that's comfortable about being on the perch a lot of times is like I'm not really impacting anyone. I'm not really hurting anyone. I'm not, responsible for anyone's mood or judgment of themselves. But I think when when getting down to earth, talking to, my friends, my family, like you said, and the fact that they feel as if I see it from their perspective. And I do see it from your perspective as much as possible. But I think the reason that I feel it from or see it from most people's perspective is that I think it's actually my perspective. I accept as much as I can about myself. And when I hear something that may seem a little dark, I try to find the darkness that it resonates with in me. And if I'm able to do that, it's much more likely that I can see the light in it. I can understand, like, okay, yeah, I get you. I understand how you got there.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you can become proficient in. And I think it's something that if we're talking about, assimilation of the shadow, the next phase that really helped me understand this of individuation, is the confrontation with anima and animus. Right?
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
So, just for our audience, so this concept or this phase is for men, anima represents the feminine aspects of their psyche, while for women, the animus represents the masculine aspects. Integrating these elements helps balance one's personality, right? And so when you really think about feminine, masculine, it's something that is across all humanity. And, some Eastern cultures kind of look at it as destruction and light, right? Yin and yang, right? But, the masculine, feminine energy works within all of us.
Right.
The destruction light works in all of us, right? Or dark and light works within all of us. And I think whenever we can do our best to harmonize it in ourselves, then we can recognize it in others, and then we can work together in collaboration to harmonize the environment.
Right.
So whenever I get dark energy thrown at me, I absorb it, transmute it, and leave it there.
Right. That is, to me, just such a powerful process. I think in earlier stages of development, we may choose to absorb negative energy from somebody that we care about, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to transmute that into something positive or something neutral, whatever. And that can lead us to the belief that we have to put up these walls. We have to guard ourselves because...
From what?
From the energy of others.
Pain.
From pain. Yeah, essentially. That energy from others is triggering a pain response, which is, it's kind of funny. I was like taking notes over here and like, why do we dig into ourselves? And I think it's just a first person point of view. Why did I start digging into myself? Well, it was like this is painful. I'm in a lot of pain. And I like, does it really have to be this way? And I thought maybe not. I'm gonna stay curious about this. And I think that just going down that journey, learning how to reinterpret events so that your inner experience is one that is more of your choosing, right? As opposed to feeling totally out of control and unstable and whimsical, just in terms of you're on the whim of whatever experience comes into your awareness that day, and you're beholden to that. I think it helps us build that foundation of stability. And then all the more impressive is when we can go into an interaction with somebody that we care about and be like, what's on your mind? Tell me what's troubling you.
Right.
And I'm gonna be a sounding board. I'm gonna be a mirror for you right now. If you wish to look into that and to see yourself, then I can do that for you. We can do that for each other. And that the impact that has on us internally and on the other party, of this conversation or this relationship. It's really hard to encapsulate. That for me, it just feels like something with such magnitude, something that is so worthwhile, that it ultimately just becomes like, it leads to a meaningful life, or it feels that way, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. It resonates with me. You said something earlier about, basically you could reinterpret events.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way you said that, reinterpret.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think after we work on ourselves and we come to the I am resolution, whatever that is, that we find,
Yeah.
then we do what with events? It happened.
Right.
Which is, I think you're really kind of dissolving reality, which is how I see something, how I perceive something.
Yeah.
And you're aligning it with actuality, how something actually is. So we could be involved in an event, both of us.
Yeah.
We could both be giving our statement to whoever, and you put those statements side by side, and what's going to happen? There's going to be some contrast, some differences. And we don't throw one of them out and say, "Oh, this is actually what happened," and throw one of them out, keep the other one, and say, "This is actually what happened." No, it's much more likely that they're going to take all the statements from all the witnesses,
right,
and that's what's going to contribute to what actually happened for everyone that wasn't there. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how are we not doing that with events in our life?
I think in large part we feel like we don't have that level of control. And I think in many cases, we have not unlocked those faculties. I don't think that it's necessarily something that, it's a switch that flips on. Maybe it could be. Maybe you could just wake up and have that epiphany, that realization that you have that power. But that hasn't been my experience. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, you just described it as sort of
my experience has
there,
been like a repetition.
Yeah.
Right. And making marginal progress, having, occasional breakthroughs. But really, I think with most things in my life, it's a matter of working at it. Where does the time and energy and attention go?
And that's what I meant by
yeah,
because it's a process. It's one that you've engaged in, and you see the benefits of it. You're able to kind of reframe events and see the dark and light in it.
Yeah,
and accept it, learn from it, apply it,
right,
and continue to move through life. And this time, I would imagine, working through that process, you kind of see things more as they actually are, and you can accept the dark and light in those things and those events. You can also see that in people as well. And, the question is, when we become proficient in that process, can we see something real time, see the dark, see the light, see everything fully integrated, all these seemingly paradoxical features of our existence and society, and see that it's all the same, it's all connected.
I love that you phrase it as a question, because I think it definitely it doesn't feel like an obvious yes to the person that you might run into on the street and ask that question. But Carl Jung definitely believed that it was possible and worth pursuing.
I agree. It is a worthy pursuit. Very painful.
Okay,
as
I was
well.
about to say, it looked like you were about to say, but.
Yeah, it. I mean, I wanted to say, but I stopped myself from saying, but it is it's a very painful pursuit because you have to, or we have to, if we're going to go down this road,
Yeah.
we have to accept some things that never considered about ourselves.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard.
Let's get into that. So I think, talking about it is one thing, right? But actually taking action is another entirely. And so when you look to Carl Jung and, if we were able to have him here today and ask, like, where can we start? What's a starting point for this process of individuation or becoming more whole, accepting all of ourselves? And he might encourage us to look at our triggers, which triggers are often related to our projections, right? So, I think one for me that stems, I can trace it back to my childhood, is talking over people, right? So, this is one thing I so love about our dynamic is like there's were you finished? Okay, cool. Yep. Yeah. But I'm also, a professional and I'm in meetings where there's a lot of talking over people. And, it's one of those things where it does trigger me. Like the third time that I'm spoken over, I'm likely to be more reserved in that meeting. And it's like, I'm not, if there is something that is like on the line that I really need to communicate about, then of course I would do that. But if it's more of a casual conversation, then it's likely to be, for me, like I may not engage in this conversation, with my whole self if I don't feel like we are coming in at equal stature and we're not afforded the same privileges, right? So I think that's just an example of how we could become triggered and then say, like, it's natural to be like, John just has no respect for anybody and he's always talking over people and, how dare he? That's a him problem. But the gift nested within the painful experience for me is to recognize that as a child, I was really extroverted. And sometimes my words carried over at the expense of others. So there were important ideas that did not get shared because I did not hold space for them because that was a foreign concept to me.
You were talking over people as a child more often. Okay. Gotcha.
Oh, definitely. And I think that this is just like, learning to navigate social dynamics as a child. It's like we just inherently lean on the things that come naturally to us. And I was, little fun fact, while we're on the subject of Carl Jung today, he actually coined the terms introvert and extrovert. Just like a little nugget of, I think that's so interesting. Something that is absolutely ubiquitous in psychology today and really in pop psychology and just common conversation. We know what that means. And Carl Jung brought us that.
Yes.
But anyway, just being born as a child that was more extroverted than introverted, I think that was something that I noticed and probably something that somewhere along the way was punished, right? Where there was like you shouldn't do that. You're greedy, you're selfish, and that is,
turns you into Ebenezer
like
Scrooge.
Absolutely terrifying, because I know that, I may not know everything, but at this age, I know that I care about people. I know that relationships are really important. And so being perceived as somebody that doesn't prioritize relationships or is not open to hearing the thoughts and ideas of others, I think that's challenging. That's really painful. Yeah. And it's easier to just be like isolated incident or, the source isn't credible, right? Just go into attacking the character of whoever, took issue with the event or circumstance. But when we do that, we forfeit our power to change the situation. And so that's just like an example that I can easily call to mind on how to use a trigger to do the shadow work a little bit.
I love it. I'm glad I could participate in that. It's interesting because you said that the reason you talked over people is because you really love to, what was it, convey, like you had.
I didn't mean to express that I love to talk over people.
No, you didn't express it that way.
I was an expressive child.
Yes, you were an expressive child, and you because you were expressive, you talked over people, occasionally, and then someone stopped you from doing that.
Yeah.
And then now when you get into discussions and, people are talking over you or other people, you kind of you come to the conclusion that the conversation with this person isn't valuable.
Right. That's like an easy conclusion to draw there. And I try to see both sides of it now and say, like, it could be true. It's possible that perhaps they're talking over other people because they feel that what they have to say is more important than what other people have to say. Or it could also be that I'm just being triggered by this. It's something that happens, all the time.
Yeah.
And may not come out of a place of ill intent or malice. You know, it's just like one of those things. I stepped on your foot. I'm sorry. My bad.
I had no idea there was a foot there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, that actually aligns with, one of the challenges of individuation, which is, that this process requires confrontation with self and some of the, the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we first have to confront it in ourselves. Okay, where is this trigger originating from?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the sense of provenance?
Yeah.
Right? And then once you figure that out, you have to confront the emotion and the pain around that acute event.
Yeah.
So maybe you remember being reprimanded, or maybe you remember like the kid on the elevator, being told like, no, don't be curious.
Right.
That's essentially what's happening. It's wrong to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
And not given any context or explanation, and you just stop doing it. Right. Or, now you're, fully grown and now you're triggered by it. So anytime this kid, grows up and they see somebody staring at anything or anyone, it's like, ooh, don't do that. How dare you? Right. And then they're going around, offering judgment. And so, similar to what you're talking about in the conversations, you start to confront that trigger in your own life, and then you become less confrontational around that particular thing.
Because you understand it.
You understand it.
Now it's not so scary.
Right? And then what happens? You become curious and you ask questions about that person's trigger or that person's response around that particular thing. Like, wait, I wonder if this person is talking over people because of the same reason that I was talking over people.
Right.
I wonder if they're actually just expressive or if they're just a jerk. Let me see. Let me ask them some questions, right?
Yeah.
And I think, whenever we get into individuation and we start to ask questions about people's experience, we're really trying to round out ourselves, right? And that's why I'm much more patient with people in conversation, because I'm just waiting for them to drop the mic on me, show me something about myself that, I haven't seen yet.
Right.
Right.
I think that is so interesting because, like, if we really want to engage in the shadow work, there is a direct path to doing that, and it's soliciting feedback.
Yes.
Right. However, before we go into soliciting feedback about where we are really sore, really sensitive, hurt, these areas, they tend to be shaped by past trauma.
Yes.
right? So it's like, giving somebody a stick and telling them to poke you, wherever you're sore. And that, I think, if we haven't done some work before that and set the stage, that can suddenly be a really uncomfortable, really painful experience that erodes the relationship, even though that wasn't the intent. And that's something that we want to avoid, right? And that we wouldn't encourage people to do necessarily. However, if you do have safety, a strong foundation of safety within a relationship, gosh, what a great way to leverage that relationship for both of your mutual benefit, to shed light on some of those areas. And I also want to acknowledge that this isn't about identifying your weaknesses so that you can, make them better, and now you don't have any weaknesses. No. That's like totally beside the point. Right. And please, like, weigh in on this. Correct me if you disagree, but I think that the point to me is accepting those weaknesses, understanding them, so that they go from being a rejected and unloved aspect of our overall sense of self to something that we have integrated. Right. And the beauty of that is that once we understand something, once we integrate it, once we begin to love it as it is, suddenly it's very much more likely to change. Yes. And that wasn't the object here. The objective was not to change it. It was just to accept it. And this gets into the territory of one of my other favorite psychologists, Carl Rogers. I used to have this. It was my screensaver for a long time. It said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I'm able to change. Mm-hmm. And I love that idea. Obviously, he was privy to Jung's work and did, phenomenal, probably one of the most talented therapists of all time. But yeah, I like it.
I love it. Beautifully said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So step 1, become aware of your unconscious motives and your projections. Get to know your shadow a little bit. Stop treating it as the other. This is you too, and you are not good, and you're not bad. You're both. Mm-hmm. You're everything. You're not a drop in the ocean. You're the ocean in a drop type of mindset, mentality.
Yeah. I agree.
Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot I could add to that. But we don't have much time. I think this is a beautiful concept. It's a great mechanism to deploy if you're, really looking at working on the concept of self. And like you said, it's not about completely doing away with these types of challenges. It's really about understanding that everything is in you, rather than you trying to put yourself in everything. Understanding that, everything that Chase is capable of, I'm also capable of. Yeah. And we say that in more of a positive light, like, oh yeah, if he can do it, then I can do it too.
Right.
Give it a try.
It goes both ways, though.
It goes both ways, and I think to me, it's a little bit more practical and useful when I can kind of see it in the darker sense, because I think, when I see that someone has done something that I would judge them on. And I'm able to kind of engage in a process like this, it's much more likely that I won't fall for the same tricks. Like I won't be as susceptible.
Right.
To the same schemes. Not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying
at
they'll have to get me a different way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And really what I mean is just, our human nature. And I brought up the concept of the anima and animus, and I just wanted to go back to that for very briefly. And I think what that highlights to me is one's harmony and balance in integrating those elements between the natural world and then our own ingenuity and technology.
Right.
Because I think the feminine aspect of ourselves is aligned with nature, right? And then there's the masculine part of ourselves that is aligned with doing, right? And constructing and being, industrious, right? And so, sure, that allows us to, to preserve ourselves, to survive, to grow, to thrive. But ultimately, what allows us to connect to the natural world and invariably people,
Right.
it's the feminine aspect of ourselves, right? And I think that can be very challenging for men to really get there. And so I want to say, like, that was one of the principles or stages of this concept that really resonated with me, because I started to develop my EQ. I thought it was all about IQ, right? But I really started to develop my EQ, in my 20s, like you, youngster. And, in doing that, I learned the value of connecting with people. But I can't connect with people if I'm extremely confrontational, right? And so I had to confront those triggers in my life, which mean I had to become very rational about my decisions and, really look at the events in my life. And when I did that, the triggers just weren't, as they weren't as stimulating. And
Meaning
then
you weren't as reactive
yeah,
to them. They didn't have that power over you.
Well, they weren't as stimulating, and I became more responsive than reactive. Right. So, it's one thing for, this cup to be filled with hot liquid or hot water or hot tea or whatever, right? And, it falls in my lap and I, jump up, right? It's like, oh my God, that's crazy. Or if it's extremely cold, same response or same reaction, right?
Yeah.
But if it's tepid, I'm much more likely to be like, oh, I wet my pants, right? I'm not gonna like jump up and hit my head on the ceiling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what changed about the water? Was it the volume of water in the cup? No, it was the temperature. It was this stimulus, right? The potency of the stimulus,
Right.
Or stimuli. Right. And so what I'm saying is that whenever we start to work on some of these, or confront, really, not work, but confront some of these triggers in our lives through this process, then we're much more likely to stop walking around triggering people.
Right.
Because that's what we're ultimately looking for when we confront people. We're, confrontational.
Yeah.
We're looking for someone to help us do something that we can really do ourselves. We're looking for them to put us in enough pain to see that event, to search for that event.
Right.
In a lot of ways, in an unconscious, unintentional way. That's what we're looking for. And some of us get that.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, if you seek it out, you will definitely find it.
Find it.
It's interesting. I like the metaphor, and I'm teasing it apart and trying to better understand it because, on one level, it's like the fear was really what changed there. In a sense, you spill really hot water on yourself and the fear is of pain and you have that instant pain response. And I think the fear and the pain have a relationship insofar as sustained pain over a long period of time may indicate that you are at risk, that you're in danger of dying or just succumbing to something negative.
Maladaptive. Yeah.
Maladaptive, definitely.
Accelerate your end, right?
But the pain response was also what drew your attention, your awareness to the event itself, which gives you the opportunity to examine it.
Right.
Right. So when you're responding in a more neutral state, because the water is lukewarm, then you you don't have the same mechanism there that is prompting you to reflect. However, you still have the ability to reflect because you've built that muscle memory, the mechanism there. So I think that's really interesting. I think I'm probably going to be thinking about that the rest of the day.
I'm going to be doing more responding than reacting.
Yeah.
Right. So a response to the tepid water would just be like, hey, you got any napkins? That's a response.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to do that because it wasn't as intense.
Right.
Yeah. And I think we're all looking for that intensity to kind of connect us.
Yeah.
In some way, to connect our awareness with what is consciously available. Right.
Broaden our experience.
Broaden it. Yeah. But when we can actually do that, it's just like, my therapist, we're talking about like, psychedelics and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I've noticed that like, yes, it's becoming a lot more prevalent.
Oh yeah.
And he's been practicing for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, if you do your work, you don't really need that stuff. It doesn't really have as much of an effect. But I think, it's similar. Like when we're talking about, the confrontation piece. If we're confronting ourselves enough around some of these elements, then we're much less likely to be walking around trying to find the awareness that we could find in ourselves.
Right. It's just like, so human to look for a shortcut.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's really the long way around too.
It's all a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of psychological theory supporting that this is it's a honing in process, but it's like circular. So you're kind of navigating a maze where you can make meaningful progress in a direction, find deep insight, realize that you can't progress in that direction anymore, and you have to turn back and go and follow a different path that's ultimately gonna lead you to that heart of the labyrinth or whatever. Mm-hmm. But okay, as we're wrapping up, you were talking about anima and animus, and I didn't even weigh in on this, and I think this is so me to not do that because I kind of I fail to appreciate the integration of the masculine and feminine when it comes to psychology, and sometimes I feel as though there may be like a hypersexualization of personality, which, from my perspective too, is like personality or persona. This is really like, these are the outer garments, the clothes that we put on to present ourselves to the world, and not so intentional as that, but like, these are the clothes we were given, and they can be altered, but it's a very gradual and time-consuming process to actually alter personality characteristics. We know from research that they tend to remain fairly stable over time. And I think it has an interesting impact when our lens for understanding personality constructs becomes gender dependent, or when we use gender as a moderator variable. And I'm not really sold personally. I don't know that its usefulness eclipses its expense. I think that it's a bit more costly, but all, obviously, I love psychology. I love all the theory, love Carl Jung. But yeah, I think, as Jung's relationship with Freud, for those who don't know, they were contemporaries with one another, which is like, what an incredible thing to have two of those minds that could feed off one another. And ultimately, they kind of had this falling out over, and this is my interpretation, I'm no expert, but over
you heard in the streets.
Yeah, it's what I heard on the streets.
Psychology
from
streets.
the boys.
Yeah.
The girls.
sorry. Didn't mean to talk over you. I was very expressive there.
No, you're good. Anyways, so all of that to say, they kind of had their relationship fell apart over Freud's, Jung kind of thought he had this obsession with, he was hypersexualizing every aspect of the personality, whereas Jung felt that there was more of a mystical, spiritual component. And his integration wasn't limited to the self. It could encapsulate others, which we'll get into more on a later podcast, I'm sure. But I also just want a big disclaimer. We are not experts on individuation. No. We are not experts on anything. We are just two regular people showing up, chatting about things that are interesting to us and that we feel could be beneficial in that process of growth. And I was hoping we could end with a fairly simple concept. And this is about the integration of all of the different aspects of us. And I know, for example, I know that you can be firm. I know that you have no problem stating your boundaries and being really clear about that. Resolute. Yeah, that's a great word. And I also know that you have the capacity for compassion. And that you're able to relate that compassion to others in a way that resonates with them. And so to me, it's just like, this is like the logos in eros, I might be mispronouncing that, but just like the combination of passion, intensity, also with the, the mechanics of daily life, what needs to happen, not operating solely from the heart, because as we know, the heart, it gives all. It knows no bounds, no limitations. But the head is very frugal and it counts every cost. And, no, we can't give that away because we might need it later. But like, where is the balance? How can we accept both of those parts, those aspects of ourselves, and bring it into our daily lives? Internally, externally. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any words of encouragement or questions or anything that you would encourage our listeners to think about?
Yeah, I think how could we focus on bringing those aspects into our daily lives? Into balance. Yeah, I think if we focus on our personal development and psychological health, I think if we kind of make that the focus, then it'll allow us to slowly understand what our actual selves are relative to the reality that is painted for us. Oof. Right? By ourselves.
Right.
By our stories, around events. And it'll be, like I said, free from, or what I was trying to describe, free from societal expectations.
Boom.
And unconscious influences. So if you're focusing on health, your psychological health, your personal development, I think at some point you'll get to the individuation, and it'll be easier to kind of explore these themes and concepts, which we are not experts on, but we have talked for like an hour and a half on it. So anyway, go ahead.
Yes. No, that's it. That was a beautiful end cap. I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you, Josiah, for having this conversation with me. Looking forward to the next one.
Ashe. The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bolt Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.